This is the Everyday AI Show, the everyday podcast where we simplify AI and bring its power to your fingertips. Listen daily for practical advice to boost your career, business, and everyday life.
This podcast is supported by Google. Hey everyone, David here, one of the product leads for Google Gemini. If you dream it and describe it, VO3 in Gemini can help you bring it to life as a video. Now with incredible sound effects, background noise, and even dialogue. Try it with the Google AI Pro plan or get the highest access with the Ultra plan. Sign up at gemini.google to get started and show us what you create.
Apple's latest AI research paper has gone viral. So viral, actually, it showed up in my wife's nightly business newsletter she reads that usually has absolutely nothing to do with AI. So Apple's The Illusion of Thinking paper shows evidence, well, they say that large reasoning models slam into a wall the moment that tasks get too demanding. So sounds pretty fatal for AI, right? Maybe. But if you dig deeper, you'll find flawed logic, cherry-picked testing, and an all-or-nothing grading rule that would flunk Einstein. In other words, if you take enough time to deconstruct this study, you'll find it's not much of a study at all. It's marketing from Apple, and you shouldn't fall for it. So stick with me for the next 30 minutes or so, and I'll expose this quote-unquote research paper for what it is. It's strategic deception, it's cherry-picked science, and it's weaponized research at best. All right? Hope you're excited for this one. I am. If you're new here, welcome to Everyday AI. My name is Jordan Wilson. I'm the host, and we do this every single day. This is your daily live stream podcast and free daily newsletter, helping us all not just keep up with the world of AI, but how we can use all this information to get ahead to grow our companies and our careers. So sometimes the information, like today's show, can be a little confusing, and that's what we do. We break it down, whether it's myself or bringing on world-class experts. We do it every single day, and then we break it down in our free daily newsletter. So if you haven't already, please go to youreverydayai.com and sign up for that free daily newsletter. We're going to be recapping today's show and a whole lot more, everything you need to stay in the loop and stay ahead and be the smartest person in your company. And if that's what you're trying to do, then you are definitely in the right place. So some days we start off by going over the AI news. I don't want to make this an accidental 50-minute podcast. I'm actually trying to keep these things under 30 minutes, but we'll see, because at least for today, it's Hot Take Tuesday, and I got takes. Live stream audience, it's good to see you. Thanks for tuning in. Let me know. Should I take it nice? Should I ramp it up? I'm kind of feeling spicy. I hope that's okay with you. But let's just get into it. All right. Let's deconstruct this paper, The Illusion of Thinking. All right. Like I said, it's been grabbing a lot of headlines recently. And let me also put my cards on the table, right? Because you may be thinking, okay, this Jordan guy, he's obviously very pro AI. Am I? Sure. Yeah, you could say that. If I'm being honest, I'm pro AI because I feel there's no real choice, right? I believe in large language models, the power of large language models, just the way the entire world is investing in them. There's really no other solution. And one other thing, I want to talk a little bit very quickly about my background. So I've mentioned it a couple times in our 540 plus episodes together, but I started my career as an investigative reporter. I did okay. I was a Pulitzer Fellow. I won ACP Story of the Year. So when I look at these things, I don't just read the study. Yes, I read the study manually twice. I fed it to 3 separate large language models. I combined a bunch to have conversations with the paper. So I did it old school manual. and then using AI as well. So I want you to know I'm not just blindly ever following any study, what it says or what it doesn't say, whether I have a preconceived notion on if I agree with it or not. But essentially what this study said is, hey, these large language models that reason, or what they call large reasoning models, they don't really think, right? This whole thinking thing, it's an illusion. And I'm actually very excited to break this one down, but I'm hoping to do it in a very concise way. So if I go on fewer tangents today, that's probably why. So let's just start at a glimpse. All right. So maybe you don't have 30 minutes. Maybe you have 5. Well, let me spend the next 2 minutes just giving this to you at a glimpse. Here's what's happened. And then for the rest of the episode, I'm going to lay it all down. Lay it all out for you. So, I'm not going to keep you captive here just for 20 minutes just to get to what's actually happened. Okay, so Apple just released about 4 days ago its Illusion of Thinking paper, and this was 3 days before their big conference, the Worldwide Developer Conference. And in this paper, they publicly claim that advanced AI reasoning is more or less fake. They're saying that these large reasoning models don't actually think. Their entire experiment was fundamentally rigged. All right. And I'm going to show you why and show you how. But essentially, they said that AI reasoning models couldn't use code. What? Okay. Which is the single most effective way to solve the problems that the researchers were giving them. So, the researchers are like, hey, here's all these problems. And normally a large language model would be like, yeah, I'm going to use code. Right. I'm going to use the tools at my disposal. But the Apple researchers said, nah, you can't. They also misrepresented the AI's intelligent decision to give up on impossible brute force tasks as a reasoning collapse, which I would say is not the case. And they were treating that as a feature versus a bug. Next, Apple failed to disclose that their hardest tests were technically physically impossible for the AI to pass due to its handcuffed token limits. Yeah, more on that in a bit. And y'all know I bring receipts. All right. Also, the paper's timing reveal its true purpose, a strategic media strike to distract from Apple's own AI weakness right before WWDC and their lack of AI. Because everyone knows, it's no secret, Apple has failed. And I think this will probably go down as the biggest failure in business history. Apple's absolute failure to put together anything resemblance of artificial intelligence. Maybe that's why they called it Apple Intelligence, because they couldn't actually figure out artificial intelligence, right? And this wasn't a good faith scientific study. It really wasn't. It was a calculated act of corporate deception disguised as research. And I'm not blaming this on the researchers, right? I'm sure that there were some higher ups that were pulling some strings, or maybe that, passed this down like, hey, we need to, get some research that's very hard on these large language models, these reasoning models. All right. So that's what we're going to be going over. But aside from what I just laid out, which we're going to go into more depth, I want to talk. There's at least 2 trillion other reasons Apple is putting out this quote unquote paper. All right. And I have taken my time, mainly because I do our hot takes on Tuesday, and this paper came out, I believe it was Friday or Saturday. But there's 2 trillion reasons, and no one's talking about this. Why is Apple doing this? Why has Apple put out multiple papers that literally go against the power and the capabilities of large language models and AI? Well, one, I kind of already answered. They can't figure it out. But here's 2 trillion reasons why. All right. So this is for our podcast audience. I do have some visual slides on today's episode. I'm going to do my best, as I always try to do, to describe them to you. But you can always check out the show notes or go to our website and watch the video version. So then you can see what I'm sharing on my screen. But essentially, pre-generative AI, and this was in 2021, pre-generative AI, Apple was crushing the world. This was like 92 dream team kind of dominance for Olympic basketball. It wasn't close. Apple had a $2.1 trillion market cap in 2021. And the next closest company, Microsoft, had only a 1.6 billion. Now, I'm not the best at math, but that's not close, right? Having a $500 million, $500 billion, sorry, that was 2.1 trillion market cap versus Microsoft's $1.6 trillion market cap. So they had a $500 billion lead on the next biggest company in the world, which is not even close. They were blowing out the competition. Like I said, this is 92 Dream Team. This is, 97 Bulls, the 72 intent right there. No one's close. It is a blowout. Apple is blowing out the rest of the world in terms of we are the biggest, we are the best company, and it's not even close. Fast forward to today. Yeah. Apple is the third biggest company in the US by market cap, right? And now they are a $500 billion behind Microsoft, right? Which I would say, depending on how you look at it, you could say it's Microsoft, you could say it's Google. I would probably say Microsoft is Apple's closest competitor, right? Because everyone's kind of changing in terms of where their revenue is coming from, where they're trying to compete, et cetera. But you could say historically that Microsoft and Apple have been the two competing with each other. So let me say that again. In 2021, Apple was blowing Microsoft out. All right, to the tune of $500 billion. Now, Microsoft is blowing out Apple. And if you took the same growth rates, if you take the growth rate that Microsoft had from 2021 until today, going from about a $1.6 trillion market cap to a $3.5 trillion market cap, if Apple stayed on a similar or that same growth trajectory as Microsoft did, do the math, y'all. That means Apple is at about a $5 trillion valuation. Instead, they're staggering at $3 trillion. So essentially, if they would have made the similar moves that Microsoft did, presumably they would be a $5 trillion market cap company. So they have left, you can make the argument that they've left $2 trillion in market cap on the table by not figuring out AI. And it's not for not trying, right? We've seen a lot of reporting going back multiple years. A report from 2023, which I remember covering this report the day it came out on the Everyday AI show. Yeah, we've been doing this thing for a while. And it said Apple is reportedly spending millions of dollars a day training its AI. And Apple internally at the time said that their internal model, which it was codenamed Ajax, and it did come out under a similar name, they said it is the most advanced language model and it is more powerful than ChatGPT. All right. Imagine spending millions of dollars a day just on training AI models if you're Apple. And when you finally, quote unquote, released it, you didn't even say it by name in the main keynote. It was almost like Apple was embarrassed by the language model that they released at last year's WWDC. It was a small language model that lived on device. It's Ajax model. They didn't even say it by name in the main keynote, right? Because if they would have, it would have been embarrassing. Right. So it's almost like they didn't want to claim it because they had reportedly spent many, many, many millions of dollars. And by many millions at that point, I mean, millions of dollars a day back in 2023. Do the math. That's potentially hundreds of millions or billions of dollars that they spent on AI that just didn't work. And like I said, Apple is the only big tech company that has failed to produce the most basic of AI offerings. Apple's produced nada. Nada that works, at least, right? So some headlines here from some different publications like Payments, Axios, Bloomberg, PC Magazine, Computer World. Let's read some of these headlines, shall we? The Verge. This is a crisis. New Apple report claims we'll get no Siri upgrades at WWDC due to AI turmoil. Apple's AI headaches could lead to lukewarm revenue growth. Drama at Apple as AI failures cause heads to roll. Apple sued for false advertising over Apple Intelligence. Why Apple still hasn't cracked AI. 2 more class action lawsuits target misleading Apple Intelligence claims. Yeah, Apple's rollout of AI was absolutely so bad that they have are now facing multiple class action lawsuits because they couldn't deliver the simplest version of AI that they promoted, right? And I'm technically one of those people, right? I have to be honest. I'm recording this on a Apple Mac Mini. The camera I'm using for the live stream here, it's the new iPhone. And one of the reasons I bought this new iPhone is because they're like, oh, we're going to have all this new AI on the iPhone. And here it is almost a year later. There's not a single thing on this iPhone that's quote unquote AI. There's not. Right? Like I'm looking for it. I'm like, hey, Siri, find me the AI. And Siri's, 10 minutes later, would you like me to use ChatGPT for this query? So yeah, Apple has fumbled the bag harder than any company has ever fumbled the bag, I would say, from a business perspective. Because when you think of the numbers, I don't think that's an exaggeration, because that, even though it's a hypothetical scenario I laid out, it was probably a realistic scenario that Apple should have traveled that path. They should have grown at the same rate that Microsoft grew over the last 4 years because of generative AI, but they didn't. They didn't, but they should have. Multiple trillion-dollar market cap mistake from Apple, which would very likely, I think, qualify that to be the biggest business blunder ever. And it's probably not even close. So all of Apple's competitors have been cashing in on AI, and Apple is still failing. So with trillions of dollars on the line, Apple needed a red herring. The claim that AI reasoning is an illusion, right? Because all these other companies, even though Apple has their own edge AI, these are small language models that live on device. They don't have a large reasoning model. So essentially what's happening here is all these other companies are running away, getting insane revenue from their AI offerings. And Apple's like, what if we just throw some deception and doubt and confusion in the ring here right before our big event, right? So then people will not be mad at us if we don't release anything AI at WWDC this year. So that was yesterday. On Monday, Apple had their WWDC event where they essentially took a quote unquote gap year. It was reported they took a gap year on AI. They didn't really release anything new. Whereas last year at their WWDC, they said AI every 3 seconds. They actually rebranded it because it's Apple. They're like, oh, it's not even artificial intelligence. It's Apple intelligence. Our AI is better than AI, right? And here we are a year later, and they're like, whoops, we're getting sued. We couldn't deliver, so let's take a gap year. And instead, let's create some confusion. Let's get a huge viral study. Let's throw a big smoke screen in front of everyone, cause some chaos, and then maybe people will temporarily forget that we stink at AI and that we haven't been able to deliver on our promises. And maybe shareholders will look at this study and be like, oh, smart Apple. Yeah, look, this great research shows that these large reasoning models don't work. Good thing Apple hasn't figured it out. Wrong. So let's actually deconstruct this thing. Let's take it down. All right, on my screen, I'm showing you the difference between Apple's quote unquote study, which is on the left, and what I think a real study should look like on the right. All right. And I've talked about the one on the right. Apple's study, quote unquote, is just Apple researchers. All right. Which is not abnormal. Okay. I'll say this. And I'm not saying this in a, how do I say this? Like, a lot of people are throwing some shade at some of the Apple researchers because they're technically interns. I'm not going to do that because that's technically normal, right? So when PhD candidates in computer science, right, are looking to complete some meaningful research, a lot of times big tech companies will hire them on as interns, or they were already interns there to begin with. So I'm not going to go down that route because these people are very capable. But one thing I want you to look at, it's all Apple researchers. And that's it. And like I said, that's usually only normal when you are announcing a new model and you put out a paper around a new model, right? Otherwise, good research that changes the conversation on artificial intelligence would usually look like the paper on the right. This paper is Personhood Credentials. All right. This was a pretty meaningful research paper that changed the narrative, or at least tried to change the narrative on, AIs that are trying to, imitate humans. This is what research looks like, because on this piece of research, you have researchers from multiple big companies. You have them from OpenAI, Harvard, Microsoft, University of Oxford, a lot of other ones. My screen is actually a little blurry here, but it's from dozens of companies and universities throughout the world. That's what a normal research paper looks like, right? You would see multiple companies, multiple research institutions. On the left, that's what marketing looks like. Only Apple researchers, nothing else. All right. Real quick, got to take a quick break for a word from our sponsors.
This podcast is supported by Google. Hey everyone, David here, one of the product leads for Google Gemini. Check out VO3, our state-of-the-art AI video generation model, in the Gemini app, which lets you create high-quality, 8-second videos with native audio generation. Try it with the Google AI Pro plan or get the highest access with the Ultra plan. Sign up at gemini.google to get started and show us what you create.
All right, let's get back into it and let's break down this paper a little more. And I'll tell you this, the paper's out there. It doesn't take long to read. And I think enough people by now have already gone through the more technical side of this paper line by line. So I'm just going to more focus on some big picture ideologies and methodologies that were completely elementary and just defied logic, not in a good way. Right. So let's start with their Apple's premise and these kind of flawed benchmarks. Okay. So Apple claimed the need for this test, right? Like, why would they even come out why would they come out with this research? They argued that standard AI tests for math and coding are unreliable due to data contamination. Data contamination is like kind of saying like, hey, all these other, studies that all these other researchers do from multiple companies, multiple universities, yeah, they got it wrong because, their data's bad. That's not good for a researcher. And that's why I also don't think that this is going to turn out well for Apple, because they essentially just kind of slapped a bunch of researchers silently in the face and said, yeah, your research is rubbish because you didn't even know that your data is contaminated. Not a good look. All right. So they said that also every other single, research paper, it's just contaminated data. And these models are essentially just memorizing, and they're just, they're not even reasoning. They're just remembering, right? So it's a valid concern here. So, okay, we're still fine. And their proposed solution was to create a clean and controllable environment to test what they said was a true, unvarnished reasoning limits of modern AI. All right, sure. Let's see what you got, Apple. So they came up with their kind of reasoning lab. They built what they said was a sterile testing environment using 4 classic logic puzzles, framing them as pure tests of logic. And each puzzle was paired with a simulator, an automated referee that checked every single move the AI made and immediately flagged the first illegal one, ending the test with a failure. So if a model got any of these 4 puzzles, a single move in any of these 4 puzzles wrong, test over, failure. So not good. That is hyper strict, unforgiving. That's not how large language models, especially reasoning models, would generally work. But okay, sure, Apple, do your thing. Not making sense, but let's keep going. I do want to talk specifically about one of these kind of logic games that they used, the Tower of Hanai. So this is a very classic game. And also, all of these games are classic, which were already disproving Apple's point that they were trying to prove, because they said all these other, benchmarks out there were contaminated. So they thought like, oh, well, we can use a game like Tower of Hanai that's, non-deterministic because it's a game. Wrong. All the solutions, the algorithm, everything about this Tower of Hanai is on the internet. It's in the training data. So like their original even reasoning for creating their games to test these reasoning models was absolutely bonkers. Like, no, it's already wrong. You're already wrong, and we haven't even started. All right. So this was their thought. So the Tower of Hanai is a classic computer science problem. You have to move disks between pegs, never placing a larger disk on top of a smaller disk. And there's kind of three towers. All the disks start on the left tower, and you have to ultimately move them all the way over to the right tower with the largest disk on the bottom and the smallest disk on the top. So, if there's only three disks, like this example I have on the screen, it's not terribly hard. Right. But as you add more disks, there's more complexity. So, as an example, they gave games like this, but there's three other ones. Let's just talk about the Tower of Hanai. And then they gave a system prompt and then a prompt to different reasoning large language models. And then they had them output their answer in text form. Right. And then they had a simulator essentially and double checked all of the AI models results. Okay, sure. They also did checker jumping, river crossing, and blocks world. So let's talk about the actual models. So they tested thinking versions of DeepSeek R1 and Claude 3.7 Sonnet. They did a lot of more technical testing. They technically tested some OpenAI models, but OpenAI doesn't show the complete chain of thought, whereas DeepSeek R1 and Claude 3.7 Sonnet thinking do in the API. So they did the right thing there, right, by making those the baseline models, and they also tested them against the non-thinking versions of themselves, which just adds some complexity. That's not even what we're doing here. But like I said, the scoring system is absolutely brutal because if you make one wrong mistake from getting it perfect, it's a 0. So there's obviously, when you talk about these puzzles, they're extremely complex, right? And there's many different ways that you can solve them, but also you have to think of the context window of these models, right? And also the output limit for tokens, which we're going to talk about here in a second. So this part is crucial, all right? Because let's actually first look at the results. So the results from what Apple reported, they said on easy puzzles, standard models did better, or non-thinking models. On medium puzzles, these reasoning or thinking models exceeded. And then on hard puzzles, they said all models completely failed. They didn't even try, right? And this is what they called the effort collapse. So this is where you saw, and as a former journalist, when I read this on Saturday, I'm like, oh gosh, the media is going to get, because I saw it literally once it came out, right? Because it was trending on Twitter right away, because you saw these, headlines like, oh, reasoning models collapsing, the AI wall, right? Like all these AI doomsday articles. And like, I'm reading this and I'm like, oh gosh, like the media is going to completely fall for this, right? Being a former journalist, nothing against, I go to all these conferences, I meet brilliant tech journalists, and then there's some that, are overwhelmed, and you get all these press releases and you're like, okay, this is a salacious headline. Okay, looks factual. It's a research paper. Sure, let's go with it, right? It's going to click, right? We're going to get clicks. Look at these headlines we can put on this thing, right? So that's kind of what happened. And, they talked about this effort collapse. And that was their headline finding, that on the hardest puzzles, the thinking models essentially would think less or even just give up, generating fewer words before failing. So they just said, oh, reasoning models give up. And then also the algorithm failure. Their supposed killer blow was in a separate test. They gave the models the step-by-step instructions or the algorithm, and it didn't help. And they all still failed at some point. So this is Apple's conclusion that, they just failed, right? And I have a graph here. I'm not going to spend 5 minutes to explain it, but this just shows the complexity for the Tower of Hanai example and the number of disks. So, the more disk in that example, the much harder it gets, right? I can solve it with 3. I could probably solve it with 4, but I don't have time to waste. To solve it with anything more than that, you gotta be either like have a computer science, math, like crazy logical brain, or you have to just study this game, right? It's how some people can do the Rubik's Cube, while juggling in 10 seconds while, spitting fire, or whatever these, incredible acts of, athleticism and brain power people do. But, for the most part, the average human might be able to solve this at, 4 discs, 5 discs. If you're a genius, maybe longer, but a human's not solving this at 8 discs, at 9, 10, definitely not there, right? So essentially, it's not surprising necessarily that an AI couldn't, right? Because if you get the smartest humans in the world and give them a 15 disc, are they going to be able to do it? I don't even know if it's possible, right? Anyways, let's look a little bit here about what this actually means from an output token. That's important because the models they chose, aside from the fact they didn't allow them to use code, which, come on, they also surprisingly said that they only chose the models with a 64K token output limit. All right. That's important to talk about because one of the requirements that the models had to do in the output. So Apple said that they weren't counting thinking tokens. That's not usually how it works. So that, kind of chain of thought processing, which is a lot of what's happening under the hood. But they did require the model to spit out every single move. And to put out a move, it's actually kind of complex. It's not like B1, it's not like chess. I don't know chess, but it's not like B2 to D2, right? One move can be very complex and can eat up a lot of tokens. So conservatively, right, I looked at the actual example moves that they gave. They didn't obviously share their whole findings. It was very little, and saw that most moves were 10 to 12 tokens. So conservatively, a 13 disc, right? A 13 disc problem of this Tower of Hanai would require 65,000 output tokens. Let me repeat that. The study was not possible, right? They did it all the way up to 15, 20 discs. Can't do it. If you require the model and Apple researchers, next time do what smart researchers do. Yeah, I'm getting mad because I read a lot of research papers, and this one I knew was marketing, and that made me upset, right? Not just right because I do this every day, but because there's a scientific community that I think is disgusted by this, and rightfully so. This was a haphazard, terrible study. Let me just say like how it actually is. This is a terrible study. They didn't share any of their actual results. They said, here's the system prompt. Here's an example of a prompt. And here's our overall outputs, right? You need to share exactly. Here's what the chain of thought said. Here was, on the hardest, on an 8, on a 10 disc, here's what the output was. But going by how large language models work and the requirements in their own paper, they would have to output every single move. And I'm being ultra conservative here, to solve a 13 disc would take more than 8,000 moves. And to be able to spit those all out as required by the system prompt and the example in the system prompt, it's not possible. 65,000 tokens. Okay. So Apple, you literally designed a test that you knew was going to fail at a certain point of complexity, at least according to kind of the laws and the math set forth. So their conclusion, at least, well, reasoning models are an illusion. And the thinking that we see is a trick, right? They're not actually thinking. They're just doing next token prediction. It's stage 1 thinking, not stage 2, right? I'm going to have a whole episode on this at some other point. The concept of reasoning, right? In like stage 1 and stage 2 thinking, right? So what is reasoning, right? I'd like to say it's just connecting stage one thinking anyways, right? Stage one is quick, intuitive, automatic responses based on pattern recognition learned from data. That's stage one. And then stage two represents more deliberate, analytical, or conscious approach that involves reasoning and planning. So you could say the same thing about, non-reasoning models and reasoning models. Non-reasoning models, right? These are the faster ones. These are, pattern recognition. But all stage two reasoning thinking it's just stage one, but slower. Right? So I don't know, like even the concept of arguing against reasoning models seems a little bit illogical when it's just really made up of stage one thinking anyways. It's like, what is reasoning? It's not a different language. You're just taking more time doing stage one thinking, right? Pattern recognition. That's all reasoning is anyways. In my head, right? I don't touch the stove because it's hot, right? But I've learned those different things that lead me to make that reason or to, think or plan ahead in a certain way, right? If I'm planning for a big show like this, I spent many hours planning this show. I'm using stage one thinking, right? That's literally what I'm doing. Pattern recognition. I've done this so many times. I recognize patterns. I put them together, right? That's planning. It's thousands or millions of neurons firing off in our brain. That's just quick, intuitive, automatic responses based on data and pattern recognition. That's all it is. Anyways, I'll save that for another day, another show. Let's get back to this Apple study, right? The other thing is Apple, not only did they cook the books beforehand, sorry, you did, unless you actually share the data and we can make an assumption otherwise, or we can make a connection otherwise. If we go by the math, if we look at exactly what happened and the fact that they literally decided the way that we're going to measure reasoning, well, they said the data is contaminated. So they had this brilliant idea. Let's use a non-deterministic game. It's already all on the internet anyways. It's already in the training data. So you're already wrong to begin with. And you cherry pick, right? This is almost like they got results and it then seems like they just reverse engineered the entire study, right? I'm not saying they did, but in theory, that could have happened. This study makes no sense. Go read it for yourself 2 or 3 times and then go talk with a large language model. Don't lead a large language model. Just ask, does this make sense? Or ask your own self, does this make sense? Anyways, I have an example study here, an iPhone study. All right. So the Apple researchers, they went through 25 rounds. Let's say I get 25 new iPhones and I turn off cellular data and I turn off Wi-Fi, I turn off Bluetooth, I turn off everything. But there's a new feature on iPhones called SOS and it uses satellite. All right. And then I go on vacation and I'm on satellite mode and I'm testing the phone. I'm testing, but I'm only testing a couple things, just like Apple did. I'm just going to test, FaceTime and phone calls and getting on social media and using, ChatGPT and Google Gemini on my phone. That's what I'm going to test. Okay. And then, well, turns out doesn't really work very well. So now instead of coming up with a specific report that says, hey, I'm reviewing this SOS satellite feature, which just sends messages to emergency response services. Instead, I'm going to put out, well, it's factual, right? I can put out the facts. I can say, hey, here's what I did. And then at the very end, I'm going to say, hey, I restricted, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, right? It's similarly the way that Apple set up this study. They restricted tool use, which is the way that any reasoning model would solve this thing. And guess what? I'm going to solve it here live in like 30 seconds. I'm not going to solve it. A large language model is going to solve it. You're going to see when you give the model the tools that it needs, it does the job. So I don't know why Apple thought, oh, this is brilliant. We'll just restrict its core capabilities. We'll put it in this super refined box. We'll sprinkle a bunch of, big words on people. We'll send it out to all the journalists and they're going to cover it. Yay. No. Yeah. Just wait until my report, The Illusion of iPhone Connectivity, drops, right? FaceTime doesn't work. So why does the paper fail? Well, there's a lot of reasons. I'm going to go through this quickly. The data, it is precise, but the interpretation is a spectacular failure of logic, right? Let's look at and I could go on for hours. I'm going to try to go fast now, but their clean test. So let's go over, I have 5 critiques here. All right. So first, the test is rigged. Their clean test used different puzzle games. One was Tower of Hanai, but the solutions are plastered all over the internet anyways. So the test punishes a creative AI for not being a perfect, monotonous calculator. All right, critique 2. It is designed to guarantee failure on the harder levels of this testing. By doing no tool use, Apple didn't give the models tool use, and they couldn't write code, which is the obvious and the only way that a reasoning model would actually solve the puzzle. Also, they've set these arbitrary limits. They capped the AI, specifically Claude 3.7 thinking, which is the best model that they used in terms of thinking. It was, that in DeepSeek. They capped it at $64,000 output tokens when there is a 128K model available. And also the absurd scoring, the one mistake in your out rule pretty much ensures failure. All right. And yeah, receipts. All right. So in this, when I'm reading the paper, like when I'm seeing things that are verifiably false right away, how can you take the rest of the paper seriously? Right. So, Apple said in their report, section A2, we didn't have to go to the bottom for this one. They said for Claude 3.7 Sonnet thinking and non-thinking models, we used maximum generation budget of 64,000 tokens accessed through the API interface. And I literally went through and I looked at the day this was released. The day Claude 3.7 thinking on the API was released, I went to archive.org. I got a screenshot, and yeah, obviously, there's the max token is 128K. If you can't get the basic things right, why would anyone trust your outputs, let alone a flawed methodology? All right, critique 3, mistaking intelligence for a flaw. So they said, giving up is actually a smarter strategy. So in this case, the AI correctly identified an impossible brute force task and sought a shortcut. That's the reality. And the algorithm failure is a red herring. It proves the AI is a complex mind, not a simple machine. All right, critique 4. This wall that they're talking about, it's imaginary. Because Apple's wall was just an artifact of their own restrictive rules by cutting down the token output and restricting tool use. So yeah, let's look live. What could go wrong here doing this live? All right. So I built a working Tower of Hanai in Claude 3.7. So I didn't use Claude 4. I used Claude 3.7 with thinking. All right. So this is a working, verifiable Tower of Hanai that I just built. Okay. So again, I'm not going to take too long to go through this, but the object is you have to move these 3 disks from Tower 1 on the left all the way to Tower 3 on the right. And you can never have a wider. So it's kind of like a pyramid for our podcast audience. So let's just say there's a skinny, a medium, and a thick, right all the way on the left. So you can move them one by one, and you can never set a wider one on top of a skinnier one. So I'll go ahead and, maybe I'll solve this. I did it earlier and I could solve it correctly. Right. So there's a certain number of moves. All right. Luckily here, I was able to solve it. All right. So I solved it in 7 moves, and that is the optimal number. So according to the study, if you make a wrong move, it's gone. All right. So now I can reset this, and I'm going to go to 10 disks. Okay. And this is, well, actually, no, let me go to 13. No, I'll do 10. All right. And I'm going to turn the solution speed on it very fast because I built this thing to have a solve mode. All right. So I can just click solve and we'll see. It might take a while. All right. So we'll check back on it, but we're going to see the number of moves that this does. All right. So like I said, it might take a while because the minimal solution, if you get it perfect, is 1,023 moves. All right. Well, actually, we can wait because it's already at about 400. So you'll see here for our podcast audience, this is literally going through this game step by step. The one that Apple researchers said is not possible. You'll see here, I'm not a computer scientist, right? I'm just a pretty smart person that knows the difference between marketing and research. And this Apple paper is marketing. It's not research, because you'll see silly old me, random guy here, right? I mean, I'm not a random guy, but I just built something and allowed Claude 3.7 Sonnet with thinking to pass this, right? Just for fun, I'm going to do this 13 one. Yeah. Optimal moves 8,000. All right. We're not going to sit and watch this, but maybe we'll check in on it at the end, and then we'll talk about the number of tokens. This is the example I gave. The number of tokens exceeds 64,000. So let's go. All right. So we'll check on that maybe at the very end. So let's go through our critique, the end here. And I think the real motive here, I'm sorry to use this word, but it is what it is. This is corporate propaganda. This paper isn't about science. It's a brutal corporate strategy. This is a textbook case of weaponizing research to confuse the public, and to hopefully distract stock analysts enough to where you don't lose hundreds of billions of dollars in market cap because you're not pursuing AI at the rate at which you should. That's exactly what Apple's doing here. Because if Apple truly believed that they had sound research, which they don't in this case, this isn't sound research, they would have invited researchers from other companies, competitive companies. That's what people do. Or, partner companies from multiple outside research organizations. Apple didn't do this because this is marketing, right? And no researcher at a prestigious university would have ever put their name on this study. It's not sound. There are more holes in this thing than Swiss cheese. And this is really this fits Apple's pattern of cynical research, because this is not the first time they've done it. They've done it multiple times, right? They put out these papers that are essentially downplaying AI's impact while they're still scrambling to figure AI out. And this provides cover for their own AI weakness and their long-standing failure of Siri. I mean, let's talk about this. How much has Apple invested in Siri? Countless amounts. Yet, OpenAI, Google, and other companies, and even little startups, have smart AI assistants like Siri that run laps around Siri. This is just Apple's pattern of failure. And then we have to talk about this premeditated media strike, right? Are you going to tell me who's actually believing this? Right? That this comes out hours before Apple's big WWDC announcement where, we're actually not really announcing anything revolutionary when it comes to AI. Hey, did you see our research paper? This whole AI thing, we're not sure about it. Look at this research. No, the research paper is useless, right? Go read my iPhone reports where I take my phone in a cave, in a dark room, and I write how the camera doesn't work and I cover the flash, right? No. Anyone with a brain and who knows the basics of AI and takes the time to analytically read this report knows that this thing, ultimately, this is damage control. This is PR. This is marketing. This is a pre-buttal designed to discredit the entire field right before they were underwhelmed. the FUD, right? The FUD strategy. So the whole point was to dampen, with the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, is just to dampen the competitor hype and to make breakthroughs from Google and OpenAI seem like an illusion, and Claude, Anthropic, and to lower expectation for themselves. And this is to posture themselves as skeptics, not laggards, and a desperate move, I think, from a company that is playing from very far behind. So final verdict as we wrap this up, right? Darn, my Tower of Hanai 13 disc may not finish in time unless I really draw this out, which I'm not going to do. This isn't a research paper. It's not. This is cherry-picked science at best that is meant to deceive the public, and Apple accomplished that, right? There's going to be clapback, right? Because the scientific AI research community, they're pissed. Go take a look on Twitter. Go take a look on Reddit. Like, researchers are not happy about this because essentially what Apple did by, kind of more or less saying that all previous research, the data is contaminated. And then they do this, little board game test where all the results are online anyways. Like, researchers are not happy about this because this was a slap in the face to them. And essentially, Apple was kind of invalidating some great research, or trying to anyways, by saying, oh, all prior research was invalid. And actually, us at Apple, we're just going to now set the tone and say, hey, these large reasoning models that are actually revolutionary, that are out there literally curing diseases, finding new drug discoveries, they're not that good. They're actually bad. It's an illusion. Don't worry. Trust us. We're Apple, right? But it's scientifically illogical. Like, it's a biased test with a predetermined outcome. I could be wrong there, but I think there's a reason that Apple didn't show their work, right? Because then people would have quickly picked this apart before their WWDC announcement. And I'm telling you, this is not over. Whether it's in 3 months or 3 years, this thing is going to unravel. And there is going to be well-rounded, scientifically sound research that takes this quote unquote study, this piece of Apple marketing, and just puts it in a shredder, right? And Apple will take a huge black eye from it, and rightfully so. This is strategically deceptive, a ruthless and cynical market play, and the real illusion inside this illusion of thinking paper, the real illusion is the paper itself. Period. All right. I hope this is helpful, y'all. That's it. I lied again. I said like 30-ish minutes. We went 50. I'm sorry, y'all. I really wanted to do as much as I could to provide you depth, because unfortunately, what happens a lot of times in this space when a big company comes out with a paper, right around an important event, sometimes the media just blindly writes about it, and that shapes the public discourse. And not everyone has a super watchful eye and can break this down at a really granular level with context and tell you what it actually means. So I hope this was helpful. All right, little hot take Tuesday, extra spice for you. If you haven't already, please go to youreverydayai.com. Sign up for the free daily newsletter. We're going to be recapping the short version of this show. So maybe you weren't able to listen to it all. That's okay. It's going to be in the newsletter. So make sure you go to youreverydayai.com. Sign up for that. Thank you for tuning in. Hope to see you tomorrow and every day for more Everyday AI. Thanks, y'all.
This podcast is supported by Google. Hey everyone, David here, one of the product leads for Google Gemini. If you dream it and describe it, VO3 in Gemini can help you bring it to life as a video. Now with incredible sound effects, background noise, and even dialogue. Try it with the Google AI Pro plan or get the highest access with the Ultra plan. Sign up at gemini.google to get started and show us what you create.
That's a wrap for today's edition of Everyday AI. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating. It helps keep us going. For a little more AI magic, visit youreverydayai.com and sign up to our daily newsletter so you don't get left behind. Go break some barriers, and we'll see you next time.